Hi. Ogigi Gaming. Hey, what you doing? So, we're on our second part of moving toward the bosses, and we're getting ready to collect the fragments from the Shaper. So, the Shaper and the Elder kind of go together. So, it's going to be hard for me to talk about the elder and the next part. So I'm kind of going to talk about both for this one. So we're going to cover the shaper and the elder. So I don't know if you remember back, probably not because you're probably not as old as me, but there was a really cool song back in 1968, 69 by the Zombies. Who's Your Daddy? Now, I know nowadays, well, the name of the song is Time of the Season, but there's a phrase in it that says, Who's your daddy? Very popular back then. I know that now that has a little different thought. Maybe, I don't know how people interpret that now. But in this song, it says, What's your name? Who's your daddy? Is he rich like me? When I found out this story about Xana and the Shaper, that was the first thing that came to mind. So I promised you a story. So let's get into the story of the Shaper. So actually, the Shaper's name is Valdo. And guess what? It's Xana's daddy. Okay, so he writes his memories down. And I think there's probably like, let's look, 16 pages of him writing his memory. And you can find all of this in the POE wiki. And you can just type in Shaper, and then it'll give you all the information on how you can beat the Shaper, the information about the Shaper, and a little lore about the Shaper. So let's talk about that. Because apparently this guy, Valdo, okay, he was commissioned by the Templar in repairing a strange device that was delivered to him. Okay, so this was a golden machine and it was broken and it was in ruins, but it was believed to contain dark secrets. And the High Templar had asked that he restore it and weaponize it, or whatever powers it might contain. Now, at that time, he had a daughter, Xana, and she was probably about 5 years old or so. And she was a very quiet, sweet young girl, and she was grieving for the loss of her mother. Now, we don't know how her mama died, but we know that she is grieving, and she's suffering from nightmares and traumas. A lot of things are going on with her, and he is having to work day and night trying to figure out this device. And he later writes that he wonders if it was a sign to come of what was happening with this device. So he is working on the device. It's shattered in a lot of pieces, and he's trying to figure it out. And he's spending all of his time trying to rebuild and figure out how this thing functions. And he's just exhausted. And so what he does is he lays down and he falls into a deep, deep sleep next to the device. And when he wakes up, he's in a beautiful place. I mean, the skies are blue and the birds are singing. He can feel the warm air. It's just a beautiful experience. And so he wanders around in this strange land. And soon he realizes that he's not alone. So he's in the tall grass in the fields, and it's so beautiful. And at that moment, he meets a fellow wanderer. It was shade. It was a whisper of embodied smoke, barely heard or seen among the vegetation. It rose and spoke to me, as he said, not through language, but through thoughts and pictures. colors, and emotions bursting into my mind like water coming up from the cracks of the earth. The shade welcomed him to the land and asked him how he had arrived. Eager for answers, he found himself enthusiastically volunteering information in great detail about his daughter and of the coarse and strange, mysterious device. And so the shade nodded, and he knew of the device. He said the machine was a doorway between my world and the dreamlands. The device had been lost, broken, torn apart by villains and thieves. And the shade was overjoyed to hear it found and offered to help him rebuild it and find the last missing pieces. Valdo thought it was too good to be true, that it would open up the gateway between the worlds, and there would be goodness of all the lands, and it would just be a wonderful experience. And as he lay down in the cool grass, bathing himself in the soothing sun, he found that he slept once more, and that when he opened his eyes, he was in the cold, empty darkness of his study. So weeks had passed, and the sun had set, the moon had rose, and he found himself asleep at the foot of the strange device, only waking up to the reality of another world inside of its own. And he would transition into the dreamlands. And in his sleep, he would apprentice himself. The shade would apprentice him, allowing to teach him the ways of the strange place. And he learned how to shape and build things from his imagination, forming them in thin air, as if by a great marvel. And it was through his tempering of his mind and through the instructions he began to rebuild and finding the missing components of the device. Now, how exciting was that? But when the High Templar visited, he'd lie and make excuses. He didn't want him to know of the power he had uncovered. He wanted his dreamland to be his own secret, to belong to him and him alone. Not even his daughter Xana knew. And the day came when the missing part of the great device was finally formed. And this bizarre segment meant to hold magical images of ancient maps. But it was the day that the shade requested one favor. It was shown sudden images of the past. The shade, once a proud ruler, king of all the dreamlands. He saw his good and noble kingdom and the shadow that fell upon his domain. A sect of hateful men and women, the watchers of decay, rose up to destroy the shade. Questing to control the land, the terrorists fashioned a powerful blade meant to divorce the king's spirit from his body and curse it to wander in his former kingdom while his body blistered in the stone. He was mortified. Valdo was mortified. How could people do such cruel things to this humble creature? And where were these villains? Had they been the same ones who had made off with the device? What was going on? The shade led him into a deep, dark forest and revealed in the depths of a forgotten cave a statue, a cast from black marble, pierced but what I assume to be the very sword from my vision. It was frightening, utterly terrifying to behold. The creature it depicted, a violent thing, stood amidst the altar of ancient wood and stone, and it brought chills and fear up his spine the moment the shade closed in from behind. "Pull the blade from my chest," the shade said upon my mind in both image and thought. Remove the sword and free me. But as I found myself reaching out to do what he asked, great horror came upon me at that time. Doubt entered my mind. I wondered if this creature was who it had told me it was. I resolved to hold off for a moment, to ask more questions, to discover a greater understanding of the shade. At merely the suggestion of rebellion, the shade flew into a fury. It flamed red, full of rage. And though it could not speak, it made its intentions very, very clear. I felt my mind torn as images of murder were forced upon me. I was doing things, terrible things to the ones I loved, to my daughter. I fled in a panic, running from the cave through the dark forest, cursing myself for ever trusting such a strange, strange creature so blindly. At last, in desperation, I found a small abandoned foxhole and burrowed inside. The shade passed by, still flaming in anger, searching desperately for me. It was in that dark, damp hole that I trembled with fear, weeping in silence, until at last I fell asleep, returning once more to my laboratory. Once back, I fled into the streets, arriving home in the dead of night. Bursting through my daughter's bedroom, I woke her and hugged her tight, shaking and crying, promising that I would never, never, never let her go. Months passed since my horrifying descent into the foxhole, since the shade revealed its true nature. Every day, the slimed and poisoned tendrils of fear gripped ever tight into my flesh, and each morning I locked myself into my study. I'd almost given up hope. So little did I really know about the shade and its dreamlands. That is until this morning, when a shipment arrived for me. The Watchers of Decay did indeed exist at one time in our world's distant path. What I got was information on them, the truth of their history. It's unbearable that I hesitate now to even write it, to put it in words in my own journal. They were called the Elder. He was a creature of madness, born of oblivion from before time itself began. Once only an abstract expression, the Elder was given physical form. It entered our realm. It fashioned itself with chaos and a secret world, hunting ground. Oh, the Elder came here out of hunger, preferring victims of younger flesh. It became the boogeyman. It dragged our children off into the night, casting them into the realm of the shadows and feasting upon their nightmares undisturbed. The Elder designed, cultivated something to sustain and birth forth its true gold, its true self, the decay. By the gods, even now, as I write this, Valdo said, I free my hand. I can feel my hand trembling, and I struggle to keep my mind on the task. The Elder, it cannot be killed. The Watchers, they built the device so as to travel to and lock tight its kingdom of torment, bringing with them the blade I saw, a weapon capable of divorcing agent from form, to bring the elder a kind of internal rest. There, in its den, the nightmares of children, victims, the elder became trapped, starved, unable to hunt, held in chains. The elder's form may be trapped in stone, but it roams free. I felt it. What if someone else were to enter the dreamland and encounter the shade? My meeting with the elder must have refreshed its vigor, and I must find a way to put a stop to it before it finds a path to freedom. If not for my sake, then for my daughter's. Wow. What a story. It goes on and it talks a little bit more about what happened. You'll probably want to read to find out the full details of what happened. I won't keep you much longer telling you the story. But I will tell you at the end, he writes a letter to Xana. And he talks about his love for her and the fears that he has. And so it makes me think as I read how I'm going to slay the Shaper and the Elder. But as far as the Shaper goes, I know that what I have seen and read, that Xana will be in a protective bubble that I will be able to get into and potentially help stay safe. But my most important thing is for her health. She cannot die. So, interesting story that the Shaper is indeed Xana's daddy. And so with that, I will let you go so that we can continue on. But I thank you for listening to my story about the Elder and the Shaper. So don't forget, read it for yourself in Memories in the POE Wiki. Thank you.